My name is Marielle Knox. I was 29 when the letter arrived, the one that would quietly unravel everything I thought I knew about my own family. It came on a Tuesday, tucked between a pizza flyer and an electric bill, in an envelope with the state nursing board seal stamped in the corner. I remember standing in my kitchen in my scrubs, keys still in my hand, staring at that seal like it might rearrange itself into something less frightening if I looked long enough. It didn't. Notice of formal complaint. Allegation. Patient endangerment. Investigation pending. I had been a nurse for 6 years. Med-surg, then oncology, then the float pool because I liked the variety and I liked being needed in the places nobody else wanted to work. I had never once had so much as a verbal warning. My hands did not shake reading medication labels. My hands shook now. I called the number on the letter with my heart doing something strange and irregular in my chest. The woman on the other end was polite in the practiced way of someone who delivers bad news for a living. She couldn't tell me who filed the complaint. Confidential, she said. She could tell me it alleged falsified documentation and medication mishandling on a night I was almost certain I hadn't even been on shift. I checked my schedule 3 times before I believed myself. I hadn't been on shift. Grief has a way of making you doubt your own memory, and I was still grieving. My grandmother, Eleanor, had died 11 weeks earlier, in the house she'd lived in for 40 years, in the bed by the window where she used to read to me every summer of my childhood. She left me the house, and she left me something else too, something my parents had not stopped mentioning since the reading of the will. $3.5 million, most of it from land she'd quietly bought and sold decades before anyone in our family understood what land like that would someday be worth. My parents got the house on the lake. My older brother, Desmond, got the investment portfolio. I got the number that made my mother go very still and very quiet at the lawyer's long table, the number that made my father ask, twice, whether the will could be revisited. It could not. I hadn't thought much of it. Grief was too loud to leave room for suspicion. I drove home that night with the letter on my passenger seat like it was something alive, something I didn't want too close to me, and I told myself there had been a clerical error. A mix-up with another nurse. A misfiled report. I did not yet let myself think the word deliberate. I would, soon enough. But that night, I only sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, engine off, hands on the wheel, watching the porch light flicker the way it always had, and I let myself feel, for the last time in a long while, like a woman whose family was simply her family, nothing more complicated than that. The investigation moved slowly, the way institutional things do, but my life did not wait for it. My supervisor, a steady, kind woman named Renata, who had trained half the floor, called me into her office 2 days after the letter came. She slid a printed incident report across the desk, my name on it, a signature that was almost mine, close enough to pass a glance, but not close enough to survive a real look. The handwriting leaned the wrong way. My am never closed like that. Someone typed most of it, Renata said carefully, and then signed the bottom by hand. I stared at that signature until the letters stopped meaning anything. I thought of my mother's handwriting first, unbidden, the way you think of a name before you mean to. She used to sign my school permission slips when I was too busy to remember. She used to say she knew my signature better than I did. I didn't say this out loud. Not yet. It felt like accusing a house of catching itself on fire. I asked to see the original complaint file, and administration told me, gently, that during an active investigation I didn't have that right. Only my union rep and the board did. I sat with that helplessness for 3 days, unable to sleep more than in fragments, replaying every shift I'd worked in the last year, wondering if I'd missed something, wondering if the version of myself under investigation was somehow real, and I simply hadn't noticed becoming her. It was my brother who cracked the door open without meaning to. Desmond called on a Thursday night, half a glass of wine into a conversation he probably regretted starting. He wasn't cruel, my brother, just weak in the particular way of people who have spent a lifetime avoiding their parents' disappointment by redirecting it elsewhere. Mom's been weird, he said. Like, weird relieved. Ever since your work thing started. What do you mean, relieved? A pause. Wine-soft and careless. She told Dad the estate lawyer said something about beneficiaries needing good standing for a trust like that. Professional good standing. I don't know. I wasn't really listening. I went very quiet on my end of the phone. Marielle? I have to go, I said, and I did, and I sat on my bathroom floor afterward with my back against the tub, running that phrase over and over. Professional good standing. A clause I had never read, in a trust one had never been shown in full, that my own mother apparently knew by heart. That was the first crack. Small hairline, easy to explain away if I'd wanted to. I didn't want to. Some part of me, the part that reads chart after chart after chart looking for the one number that doesn't fit, had already started looking for the rest of the fracture. I requested the full trust documents the next morning, the ones I'd skimmed once, grief-fogged, at the lawyer's office and then folded away in a drawer like something too heavy to hold twice. I read them at my kitchen table at 2 a.m., a mug of tea going cold beside me, a highlighter uncapped in my hand for the first time since nursing school. There it was, in careful legal language, page 14, a clause my grandmother's attorney had apparently included at her own insistence, that the primary beneficiary maintain good professional standing in her licensed field for the funds to transfer outright, rather than into a restricted, court-supervised arrangement administered, in the event of forfeiture, by the secondary listed parties. The secondary listed parties were my parents. I read it 4 times. I am not ashamed to say I cried the 4th time, not from fear anymore, but from something colder and stranger. The particular grief of understanding a person you loved might have unknowingly built the very trapdoor someone else would later use against her intentions. My grandmother hadn't written that clause to punish me. She'd written it, I would later learn, because she worried I worked too hard, burned too bright, and she wanted to protect the money from a version of me that might lose herself in the job. She never imagined it as a lever. She imagined it as a guardrail. Someone else had looked at that guardrail and seen an on-ramp. I thought about confronting my parents that same week. I wrote the words in my head a dozen times, in the shower, in traffic, lying awake at 3 a.m. I imagined my mother's face doing what it always did when cornered, the sorrowful tilt, the wounded blink, the sentence that always began with "after everything I've done for you." I knew, with the particular clarity grief sometimes gives you, that confronting them without proof would only hand them the narrative. They would call me paranoid, ungrateful, unwell, even, and unwell was a dangerous word for a woman already under professional investigation. So I didn't confront them. I became, instead, very quiet, very patient. I requested my full employee badge swipe history from HR, a routine request, nothing suspicious, to establish exactly where I had and hadn't been on the night in question. I began keeping a private log, dated and factual, no accusations, just observations. Mother mentioned trust language unprompted. Father asked lawyer, twice, about alternative structures. Signature on report does not match mine. I was building a chart, not on a patient this time, on my own family. The break came from an unexpected corner. My grandmother's longtime housekeeper, Inez, who had worked for her for over 20 years and had quietly kept, in the way that people who love someone quietly keep things, a small wooden box of cards and letters Eleanor had saved over the decades. Birthday cards. Get well notes. A file, almost, of everyone's handwriting, collected the way some people collect photographs. Inez came to my grandmother's memorial dinner, the small one, months late, that our family finally managed to organize. She found me alone on the back porch, away from the noise, and she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. "Your mother's handwriting hasn't changed since you were small," she said, not unkindly, almost sadly. I'd know it in the dark. I didn't understand, at first, why she was telling me this. Then she opened her purse and handed me an old birthday card, my mother's handwriting on the inside, looping and specific, the same slight backward lean on every capital M that I had stared at for days on a photocopied incident report. I did not ask her to give me the card as evidence. I want to be honest about that. In this telling, I did not manipulate a grieving old woman into becoming my witness. She offered herself, quietly, the way people offer the truth when they've been carrying it a long time and are simply tired of the weight. "I always wondered," Inez said, looking out at the yard, "why your mother asked to borrow one of your old employee forms. Years ago, Said she needed it for insurance. Insurance. A word soft enough to disguise almost anything. I didn't cry that night. I want that noted too because I think people expect the dramatic collapse, the raised voice, the shattering plate. It wasn't like that. It was quieter and stranger than fury. It was the specific, hollowing calm of watching a shape you'd refuse to see finally resolve itself completely, the way an optical illusion snaps from meaningless lines into an unmistakable picture, and you can never again see it as only lines. I thanked Inez. I held that card like it might dissolve if I gripped it too hard. And I drove home already knowing, with a strange steadiness that sometimes follows devastation instead of preceding it, exactly what I was going to do next, and that it would not involve raising my voice even once. I did not go to the police. I did not confront my parents at a family dinner with the card thrown dramatically onto the table. That kind of ending belongs to a different kind of story, and it is not, I have come to believe, the kind that actually restores anything. Instead, I went to my union representative, a tired, sharp-eyed man named Orrin who had seen every version of institutional injustice a hospital could produce. I showed him my badge swipe records proving I wasn't even in the building the night of the alleged incident. I showed him the handwriting comparison, not as legal proof, but as a thread worth pulling. I showed him my careful, dated log. This isn't just a defense, he said slowly, turning the pages. This is a fraud complaint waiting to happen. I asked him not to escalate it as fraud, not yet. I wasn't ready. Not because I doubted the truth, but because some part of me still needed to understand why, and filing charges felt like slamming a door I hadn't finished looking through. The board's own investigator, reviewing the badge records and the clear inconsistency in shift logs, closed the case within 3 weeks. Complaint unsubstantiated. No corroborating evidence of presence on unit. 5 words that returned my whole professional life to me, typed in the flat, indifferent font of bureaucracy, and I sat with that letter in my hands and felt something in my chest finally unclench that had been clenched for over a month. I did not celebrate. I drove, instead, to my grandmother's house, my house now, and sat in the room by the window where she used to read to me, and I told her out loud, foolishly, the way you talk to people who can't answer anymore, that I was going to be okay. Then I called my parents and asked them to meet me there. Alone. No lawyers, no brother as a buffer, no lake house, no neutral restaurant where a scene would embarrass them into softness. Just the 3 of us, in the room where all of this had actually begun, whether they knew it or not. I did not plan to shout. I had, by then, done all my shouting privately into pillows and steering wheels and empty hospital break rooms. What I wanted from that room was something else entirely, not their punishment but their reckoning. There is a difference I've learned, though it took me a long time to trust it. They arrived within minutes of each other, my mother first, wearing the same careful, sorrowful expression she'd worn at the will reading, as though grief were a garment she kept pressed and ready. I set the card on the table between us. Just that. No speech, no accusation yet. Only Inez's birthday card, my mother's handwriting curling across the inside in the same distinctive lean as the signature on the incident report, laid flat under the lamp where none of us could pretend not to see it clearly. My mother went very still. My father picked it up, read it, set it down without meeting my eyes, and in that small refusal I understood something about him I'd always half known and never let myself fully feel, that he had gone along with it not out of malice, exactly, but out of the same quiet cowardice that had let him go along with almost everything my mother ever decided. I'm not here to ruin you, I said, and I meant it, and I think that surprised them more than anger would have. I'm here because I need to hear you say it. Not for the board. Not for a courtroom. For me. My mother's composure cracked slowly, not into an apology at first, but into justification. She talked about how hard she'd worked, how the lake house needed repairs she couldn't afford, how Grandma had always favored me a little, hadn't she? Always had, and wasn't it, in some cosmic sense, only fair? Fair, I repeated, and something in my voice must have carried more weight than volume, because she stopped. I didn't need her to grovel. I needed her to stop rewriting the story in real time in front of me, and eventually, worn down by her own unconvincing momentum, she did. She admitted to borrowing the old employee form years ago. She admitted to knowing someone. She wouldn't say who, not fully, though I suspected a cousin in records who owed my father a favor, who could file something that would look official enough to trigger a review. She never once said the word sorry in a way that felt real. My father said it for both of them, quietly, staring at the table, and it was somehow worse than silence, because it was clearly more about ending the conversation than repairing anything underneath it. I did not forgive them that day. I want to be honest about that too. I told them I needed time, that the money was staying exactly where the trust said it should, that I would not be filing a fraud complaint as long as they never attempted anything like this again, not as a gift to them, but as a boundary for myself. One more piece of peace I refused to let this cost me. Then I asked them to leave. The months that followed were quieter than any I'd known in years, not empty, but settled, the way a house feels different once you've finally opened every closet in it and found nothing worse than dust. I didn't return to the float pool right away. I used part of the money, carefully, deliberately, the way my grandmother would have wanted, to finish the specialization in oncology nursing I'd been putting off for years, the one I used to talk about at her kitchen table while she poured tea and told me I'd make a wonderful nurse someday, the kind patients remember by name. I kept the house. I planted something new in the garden every season, the way she used to, and some nights I sat by that same window with a book I wasn't really reading, just glad for the quiet. My relationship with my parents did not repair itself into something warm. I want to resist the easy ending here, the one where forgiveness arrives wrapped like a gift and everyone hugs at Thanksgiving. What actually happened was smaller and more honest than that. We spoke on holidays. Briefly. Politely. My mother sent a card on my birthday that felt like an apology written in the only language she had left. Small talk and careful distance. Desmond, to his credit, apologized properly, the only one of the three who did. He'd suspected more than he admitted on that half-drunk phone call, he told me later, and he'd said nothing because he didn't want to be the one who broke the family open. I understood that impulse even as I told him gently that families that require silence to survive were rarely worth protecting in that particular shape. I thought I would feel triumphant once the truth was fully out. Instead, I felt something quieter, a kind of settled clarity, the sense of a wound that has finally been cleaned properly instead of simply bandaged over infection. It didn't undo what happened. It just meant I stopped carrying it as a secret weight and started carrying it, instead, as something merely true. A year later, almost to the day, I sat in that same room by the window, filling out paperwork for my new specialty certification, the framed photo of my grandmother on the side table where I'd placed it the week she died, young in the picture, laughing at something outside the frame, before I was even born, before any of us were the people we became. I think about her often when I'm alone in that house. Not the frail woman in the bed by the window at the end, but the sharp, funny, watchful woman who used to read to me in that exact spot, who built a guardrail out of love and had it turned briefly into a weapon by people she trusted more than she probably should have. I don't know if she'd be proud of how I handled it. I like to think she would be. Not because I won exactly, but because I never once became the kind of person who needed to hurt someone to feel whole again. I think that mattered to her more than money ever did. It's certainly come to matter more to me. Some nights, I still hear my mother's voice in my head, that soft, wounded after everything I've done for you, and I let it pass through me without catching on anything anymore. It doesn't define what happened. It's just an echo. The way old houses have echoes, and you learn eventually which ones to listen to and which ones to simply let fade into the walls. The light comes through that window every evening around the same time, gold and low, exactly the way I remember it from childhood summers, exactly the way it must have looked to her for 40 years before it ever looked that way to me. I sit in it sometimes and think about how close I came to losing something that was never really about the money at all, not the job, not the name people called me by, not even the truth, in the end. What I almost lost was the version of myself who could sit in this light without flinching. I have her back now. Quietly. Completely. And that, more than any number in any trust, is the inheritance I intend to keep.